get into Leviticus, but I feel the need to say any follow-up questions from Job last week, which I'm assuming kind of no, because your brains were just utterly, fried by world mandate. But you never know. Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
I have a small question.
All right. Is it a small question that requires a big answer?
Well, not really.
All right.
You can expand if you want to make it a big answer.
Okay.
So during Job, you said that it's possible that Job was a real person.
Yeah.
Where do you lean on that, on the fence? Would you say that's like a 40% chance? Do you feel like, I don't know, what do you feel?
Hold on, let me get my recorder out.
Yeah, I don't have a clue. It's one of those things where, like, one day I'll be like, oh yeah, I'm 75% sure that was a real dude. And then the next day you'll catch me and I'll be like, there's no way.
Okay.
So, I got nothing.
No worries.
Anything else? I have no idea why that's funny.
Your voice is just funny.
Oh, thanks. I've been informed by my lovely bride that I use different accents for different things, and I'm not supposed to use Asian. Just so you know.
That's right, Eric.
제가 육군 군인인데 한국말은 조금 안 거들었죠. Yeah. So,
Was that Korean?
the guy who knows Korean isn't allowed to use the Asian accent. I'm just saying.
I think we earned it.
Yes.
How many languages do you know?
I don't know. Zero. I'm pretty decent in English. Yes.
I have a question. I feel like it's a dumb question, but I'm asking anyway.
I'll give you a dumb answer then.
Come on, Jack.
All right.
So you said the accuser, like we shouldn't get hung up on it's like not Satan or who it is,
Uh-huh.
correct? So is it a different character than the serpent in Genesis?
Probably.
Okay.
What else?
Crocodile and dinosaur.
Expand.
It's a croc. Get it? Crocodile, it's a croc. Yeah. Dinosaur stuff, that's just so irrelevant. It has nothing to do with anything that's going on.
It's kind of interesting to
Yeah.
talk about that.
Well, I just talked about it. So there you go. Nothing to say.
Tim believes it's a dragon.
You know what I like? Yeah, dragon's actually better, believe it or not. 7-headed dragon would be amazing for Leviathan. Yeah. So, you know what's so fun about teaching as opposed to writing, is when you're teaching, you just say this stuff and just move on, right? Like if I said that in writing, then I'd have to explain, and that's why I don't write.
You don't want to explain yourself?
Yeah, it's like, well, I can't be bothered with the details.
We're going to go to Scotland, so if they go up and see the Loch Ness Monster, is that a behemoth?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. For sure. All right, let's talk about Leviticus. There's a couple of introductory things I'd like to introduce you to. First off is the setting of the book of Leviticus. Okay? Just real ultra brief overview. You already know this because I've talked about it a lot, and just because, from elsewhere, you might know it. Story of the Bible, right? God creates perfect world. It's awesome. People are going to have good relationships with each other, good relationship with God. We crud all over that and ruin that. And humanity descends into its low point by Genesis 11. And then God's like, all right, I'm going to start working some stuff here to bring people back into relationship with myself. He works through Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Judah, the whole stuff in Genesis. When you get to Exodus, the people end up enslaved in Egypt. And as you know, the Lord delivers them, right? It's the cool, miraculous, amazing stuff in the first 15 chapters of the book of Genesis. The people leave slavery Yay! And then they wander in the wilderness. Those wanderings, the initial wanderings, the initial getting from Egypt to Mount Sinai is recorded in chapters 16 through 19. And then when they're in chapter 19, that's where we get the thing we've talked about a lot, where it's, hey, y'all want to be my people? And yeah, we want to be your people. And so, all right, you can be my kingdom of priests, my holy nation, my treasured possession, and yeah, let's do it. And then that's where you get the Ten Commandments and the law stuff, right? Because the Lord is revealing to them, hey, if you're going to be my representatives, my treasured possession, the thing that I pull aside to myself, holy nation, that is going to represent me to the world, here's my heart, here's what I care about. And that was the big part of the point of digging into the law a little bit, right? Is so that we could start to see God's heart in all of that. But as of Exodus 24, the people are God's people. They're in relationship. That's a done deal, okay? And there's some mess ups along the way, like the golden calf thing in Exodus 33, but the bulk of the rest of Exodus, after the actual Exodus, is the instructions for construction of the tabernacle and then the actual construction of the tabernacle, okay? And if you think about the book of Leviticus, we've talked about this before, if you think about the grand sort of sweeping narrative of the book of Exodus, at the beginning of the book of Exodus, the people are like, where's God? We're in a land not our own, separated from our God, in slavery, crying out to God. End of the book of Exodus, God is dwelling in a tent in their midst. He is with them, he is near them, and there's kind of supernatural awesome stuff. Cloud by day, pillar fire by night. This kind of awesome stuff that is supposed to very tangibly, very like hands-on, ooh, we can see it, God is with us. Does that make sense? The reason I'm sort of emphasizing this is because God is already with them. God is already their God. They are already his people. And then you get the book of Leviticus. And the book of Leviticus is basically how do we account for this holy God living in a tent in our midst? How does this work? How is this going to be possible? Okay? If I were to, I don't know, if I was to kind of subtitle Leviticus, it's how can a holy God live in our midst? So, you with me so far?
Yeah.
Part of what I'm trying to emphasize, though, is that the people are already in relationship with God. The reason I'm emphasizing that is because the ginormous misunderstanding of the book of Leviticus is that it's how you get into relationship with God. They're already in relationship with God. Okay? So, oh, this is how they're going to be saved. This is how they're going to get into relationship with God. They're going to do these sacrifices, and that's how they're going to, like, get accepted into the family of God. Like, you've got to understand, just from the general perspective of the narrative, they're already the people of God. Okay? So you've got to go into Leviticus with something other than this is how we get saved. Are you with me here so far? Okay. So the question then becomes, all right, what's going on? And we'll talk about that. So point number one is just situate Leviticus in the narrative. And most importantly, situate Leviticus within the fact that you're already dealing with the people of God. So this is not how to become the people of God. Okay? Next thing is just in terms of having some idea of what's going on in the book. There's there's kind of these different, I don't know, categories. I don't know if that's the right word, but there's this call to be holy because God's holy. There's this use of the word holy, separate, something that is other than or whatever. Okay? Then there's this category called common, which is really only directly mentioned in Leviticus 10:10. And then there's, I don't know, unclean. And a lot of what Leviticus is concerned with is you have a holy God living in the midst of people who sin and bring uncleanliness into the camp via not just sin but other things. We'll get into that in a moment. But like I said, a lot of what Leviticus is wrestling with is how can a holy God live in the midst of an unholy people? And so a lot of the rituals and different things that are going on in the book of Leviticus will have to do with how does one move through these different categories. So, for example, if you have something that is quote-unquote common, this might be something that is clean, it might be something that is pure, but it's just normal. It's not holy, it's not dirty, it's just normal, common. And if we want to make it holy, then we have to sanctify it. And so there's different things that you'll run into about how to take something that is common and sanctify it such that it can be in the presence of God or that it can be considered holy or whatever. And there's different stuff, for example, that has to do with the priests. However, you can take something that is holy and you can profane it, is usually a word that's used, and that'll make it common. Okay? Part of what gets real confusing is, if you profane something, that must be sin and horrible and bad and wrong and all this kind of stuff. Not necessarily. You're just taking it out of the domain of the holy and into the not specially set apart category of just common or pure or clean. Okay? And then there are different things that'll take us from common, pure, regular, normal, and move us to unclean. And these are the things that, pollute. Part of the problem here is the translations, and different translations use different words. So anyway, but pollute stuff, it becomes unclean, and then you have to cleanse stuff so it can become clean or clean, common, etc. This is a lot of what the book of Leviticus is dealing with. So a lot of the rituals, a lot of, not just the rituals, but a lot of the weird regulations, Oh, a woman gives birth. She's unclean. You're like, what? Wait, what? So it's like sin to give birth? No. It just makes you unclean. From a ritual perspective. All right? There's all kinds of junk going on. It's unclean. That's it. All right? But what happens is, and a lot of this is a translation problem, is you'll read, I think it's chapter 12. A woman has birth, and she's got to wait however long, and then she has to bring a sin offering. And it's like, oh, so she sinned by having a kid? That doesn't really make sense. Yeah, it doesn't make sense, because it's not about bringing a sin offering. It's about bringing a purification or a cleansing offering. More on that in a moment, okay? But this is a lot of what's going on in the book, okay? The weird rituals, the weird regulations, you read this stuff and you're like, who cares about that, right? It's working through this stuff. Are you with me so far?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, here's the deal. A lot of what is going on in the book it's ritual. Ritual, by definition, is acted out analogy. All right? In nerd circles, we say ritual equals enacted. That's supposed to be an A. Enacted analogy. Whatever letter goes there. Enacted analogy. All right, so first off, what's an analogy? It's like if I say this thing is like something else. Right? It's an analogy. When Jesus says, I am the gate. Well, technically, it's a metaphor, okay? But for our academic purposes, analogy and metaphor, we don't care. All right? So when Jesus is like, I am a gate, you recognize that he's not trying to say he's like some wooden object with a handle that you could potentially lock if you want. Like, you get the fact he's using an analogy, right? And in the same way, ritual, it uses analogy, but instead of like a mental thing, I am the gate, or any analogy that you can think of. This is like that. I'm only thinking of funny ones, so it's just not helpful. But ritual is you're acting it out. You're acting out something, but it's representative of something else. Okay? What?
Would communion be?
Yeah, like, all right, I'm eating a piece of styrofoam and some horrible grape juice out of a weird prepackaged cup. Why? It's an analogy for taking part in the body and blood of Christ. Right? Make sense? What are you actually doing? That's the ritual part. What are you actually doing? Well, you're sitting there with this weird plastic cup while Matthew gets excited and jumps around. And then
Cry too.
and cries. Yeah. And then you rip off a little cellophane and you take some utterly horrible thing that makes you miss the days when they had the little bread chiclets. I don't know if any of you ever had the joy of the bread chiclets, but oh my goodness. Those were amazing. That's the ritual. That's what you're actually doing. Why? Is it that the very act of the doing of the ritual, does something? Well, maybe, maybe not. We'll get to that. But it's an analogy for taking part in the body and blood of Christ. Which is an analogy, actually. But we'll leave that alone for a moment. Did you get what I'm saying? All right, and you think about any rituals. Birthday rituals are super fun. Christmas rituals. Thanksgiving rituals. Why do you eat turkey? I mean, it's delicious. But, aside from the fact that it's delicious, why do you eat turkey? It's a ritual. It's just like, to some extent, we eat turkey because we just eat turkey. Who cares? But there is also this element of, not to get too politically incorrect, but, our ancestors, especially if you're white, like ate turkey to celebrate. And so we're celebrating. I should use a different example than Thanksgiving. But like Christmas, why do you put up a tree? I mean, maybe you don't, but I do. Why do I put up a tree? I don't know.
Because your wife says so.
Yeah. I should amend that. Why does my wife put up a tree?
Yeah.
And why do I yell at the kids to help? You know, while I watch football, or who knows? But seriously, we have these rituals, right? If you think about birthdays, we have these birthday rituals. We're gonna have cake. Do you want ice cream cake? Do you want like normal cake? Do you want a cake in the shape of Thomas the Tank Engine? You know, like. Okay, you're gonna have cake, and then and then we put candles on the cake, and you're 8 years old, so we're gonna have 8 candles on the cake. You're 67. We don't care about candles for you. We don't want to burn the house down. You know, but you make a cake, and you blow out some candles, and you sing a really bad song, and like, why do you do this? Why do you do this stuff? Why do you do birthday rituals?
Are you asking a question?
Yeah. I'm ready.
It's a tradition to celebrate another year of someone's life.
All right. Why? Who cares? You know.
When's your birthday?
That person. That's a good point.
Tradition.
So it's super interesting that a lot of times in ritual the analogy gets lost over time. You know, and then you get kind of nerdy people who like to look up, well, why did we originally start putting candles on a cake? And then you find out, there was something to it. We don't care about that anymore, right? I mean, at this point, it's like, no, this is just stuff you do to have a party, celebrate, whatever. But even after an analogy loses its original analogical intent, there's still something going on that is bigger than the ritual itself. Okay? And that's the important point. Ritual is an acted analogy, and there's a recognition that when we do rituals, there's something bigger going on than just the thing that we're doing. Okay? Now, what gets lost in ritual is we start to think that the doing of the activity is the thing. Okay? In other words, here's a real example. The church, the big C, capital C, universal church, for the entirety of its history, has had debates about what is actually going on in baptism. Okay? Is that the moment when we get saved? Is that the moment when the Spirit indwells us? Well, we're saved by faith, and so the dunking must be like when the Spirit comes upon us. Oh, no, it's just a symbol that we want to be like Christ. Baptism is just an analogy for being buried in a grave and then rising again with Christ, right? Nothing actually happens in baptism. It's just something that we do to identify with Jesus. Nothing happens in baptism. It's just something we do to identify, hey, I'm with Jesus. No, a lot happens in baptism. These debates have gone on for the entire history of the church. Okay? The entire history of the church has debated what actually happens during the actual ritual act of baptism. Okay? And I think that Leviticus gives us a window, actually, into that. That's just my opinion. The point isn't what actually happens in baptism. I'm just I'm so perfectly happy to go with whatever Matthew says as the pastor of the church, because at the end of the day, I don't care. Oh, maybe I shouldn't have said that. Do I need to care at Waypoint? Oh, Becky said yes. Becky's like, yes.
Care about something.
I was in a denomination, and I was a professor within a denomination for so long that had such hardcore opinions that I just sort of I got burnt out and just decided to not care. But that's just me. I'm not recommending that as a policy. I'm just being honest. Anyway, the thing that I'm trying to get at is with any ritual, there's a natural curiosity about what actually happens in the ritual and how necessary is the ritual. Like, you may not be aware of this, but significant portions of Christians in the history of the church have wrestled with, are we saved when we're baptized? Which at the end of the day is a question concerning what actually happens through the ritual. What does the ritual actually cause to happen? Okay? And this is like a normal concern. Now, some of you may have never really thought along those lines, but I would ask, like, hey, what's your view of what's going on in Leviticus? And I won't put you on the spot, but the normal view that I've run into over many years of teaching this stuff is this is how people were forgiven. This is how they got saved. You know, how were people saved in Old Testament times? Well, they did these rituals. They made these sacrifices. And by doing these sacrifices, that, like, cleansed them of their sin. That's, at the end of the day, that's no different than saying, well, you're not saved until you get dunked, and then you're saved. Because it's this idea that there's something just in the ritual that makes it work. All right? Now, that brings me to a word I'm going to use. You don't need to write this down. This is not an important note. This is not an important part of Leviticus. This is just an Eric-ism. I use the word efficacy. I can't help it. I try and use other words, and no matter how often I teach this stuff, the word efficacy comes out of my mouth. All right? So I'm just going to define it. Efficacy just means the thing that makes something work. Does it work? Okay? So, in other words, I will say things like, where is the efficacy in the ritual? And that's a way of saying, what makes this thing work? Okay? So if Scripture says, in regards to baptism, you're buried with Christ and, like, alive, resurrected with Christ, where's the efficacy? In other words, where is the thing that actually makes it work? Whatever we're claiming the ritual does, where is the efficacy of that ritual located? Now, I'm sorry if it sounds like the nerdy prof who's just taking you down a path that nobody cares about, but what I'm actually doing is I'm rephrasing the primary thing that leads us astray as it pertains to anything ritualistic that happens in Scripture. We get confused about where the efficacy is. So we start to think that, well, if you do your Leviticus chapter 4 sin offering, you have to be forgiven of sin. We start to think things like, well, if you've been dunked in baptism, you must be saved. Whoa, wait a second. What did the pastor say when he baptized you? I mean, was he like dead to sin and alive to Christ? All right, that one worked, you know. But if he was like, all right, I now baptize you in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, it's like, well, you know, that works 50% of the time. You know, what if the pastor just says, all right, let's get her done. Boom, right? Woo! You know, that one didn't work. I'm like, where does this stuff come from? Where do we get so wrapped up? You know, if you think about communion, you know, what, you got to use real bread and real wine. Otherwise, it doesn't count because Jesus used wine. I mean, it's bread and wine. This styrofoam and grape juice stuff, you're just wasting your time. Now, we think that's silly, but I know churches who've used donuts. And like all of a sudden we're like, Matthew's like, well, I got a new idea.
As long as it's wrapped in a little
Yeah. I know pastors who have used donuts, partly because they're trying to make a point that it's not about the detail, but it doesn't matter. And then I know people who like ridicule the people who use donuts. Well, who cares? Well, here's who cares. We end up caring because we begin to fear that if we don't get the ritual just right, it's not going to work, and God's going to be angry. And, oh, by the way, we already believe he's present and angry, and so we got to get it right. And, well, you know, I mean, the Passover bread was unleavened, so bread chiclets work because they're unleavened. But, you know, we can't really serve alcohol to the crowd, so we'll use grape juice. Uh-oh. So we got to figure out how Jesus turned water into grape juice. Or we can become Lutheran and use wine. But we'll use Manischewitz, which is like the worst, cheapest wine possible. But it's wine. You know, like, I mean, it sounds like I'm just like, I'm not trying to sound like I'm making fun. I'm actually enumerating real issues that get debated ad nauseum in the local church. And I believe at the core of many of these debates is a lack of understanding of what ritual is, how ritual works, and what ritual does. In other words, what makes a ritual efficacious? Where does the efficacy of a ritual come from? Ultimately, in Scripture, the answer is God. So let's try and dig into that. All right. Let's blast through. I think, you know, for the sake of time, we're not going to have a lot of time to get into this kind of stuff over on this end. Although we'll do some of this. I'm happy to like answer questions along the way. It was really funny. I just got a text this week from someone I know asking about Leviticus chapter 12. He's like, oh, good timing. I have to teach Leviticus. So I recognize that there might be random questions that you have pertaining to Leviticus. I'm happy to address those. But let's get the big picture first, okay? The big picture is, how can a holy God live in the midst of an unholy people? So Leviticus chapter 1. Leviticus chapter 1 is often called the burnt offering. Sometimes it's, well, in old translations it was called the Holocaust offering. That fell out of favor for obvious reasons. And sometimes it's called the whole offering, as in WHOLE, because you burn the whole thing. The Hebrew word is actually a word that means going up. It's the going up offering, because the whole thing goes up in smoke, basically, is the idea. Doesn't really matter what you call it. This is a offering that deals with general human sinfulness. The thing that I want you to notice, the reason I'm talking about Leviticus chapter 1, is I want you to see how the chapter is organized. So this is Leviticus 1 verse 3. If the offering is a burnt offering from the herd, you are to offer a male without defect. You must present it at the entrance to the tent of meeting so that you may be acceptable to Yahweh, and you're to lay your hand on the head of the burnt offering, and it will be accepted on your behalf to make atonement for you. You're to slaughter the young bull before Yahweh, and then Aaron, blah, blah, sprinkle blood. Atonement is a messy word, especially because we have all sorts of Christian ideas about what atonement means. So in Leviticus, when you see the word atonement, I want you to see the word cleanse, because that's what it's saying. So you're to lay your hand, this is verse 4, lay your hand on the head of the burnt offering, and it will be accepted on your behalf to cleanse for you. It does not say to cleanse you. It is to cleanse for you. It's an important distinction. You burn the thing, basically, you burn the whole thing, and then the end, verse 9, end of verse 9, it's a burnt offering, a food offering. We don't have time for that, but that's super interesting. A pleasing or pleasing, restful, kind of like a, it's like barbecue. Pleasing aroma to Yahweh. The word that's translated pleasing is the same word that you get the name Noah from, and it is this idea of peace isn't really the right word. Rest, it's not really the right word. It's just like, oh, this works, kind of a thing. In Genesis, there's a thing about, we'll call him Noah because he'll give us, I don't know how it's translated. Relief? Whatever. There you go. Anyway, pleasing is a good translation. It's restfully pleasing to the Lord. All right. But the thing I want you to notice is verse 3, if it's a burnt offering from the herd. Okay, verse 10. What if it is a burnt offering from the flock? So we started with herd. We went to flock. And then if you take the time to read verses 10 and following, you'll see that it's very similar to verses 3 and following. The difference isn't in the details of what you do. The difference is in herd or flock. And then when you get to verse 14, if the offering to Yahweh is a burnt offering of birds, right? And then it's similar kinds of things that you do. So the organization of chapter 1 is herd, flock, birds. What kind of organization is this?
Higher.
What?
Higher.
What does that mean? Like cows are in charge of birds? What do you mean hierarchy?
Biggest to size.
Like one thing.
What? Where's more?
One thing can atone for different types of things or more of one.
That's not in the text. It's a great guess. It makes real logical sense, but it's not in there. Yeah. It's exactly what it has to do with. This is economics. All right? You got your ballers. You got your middle and upper middle class, and you got the rest of us. Okay? That's economics. Torah allows for economic differentiation. Guys, you got to understand this is huge in the ancient world because everywhere in the ancient world, wealth equals religious privilege. Everywhere and always, wealth is religious privilege. And so for Torah to show up and say, let's make a way where the thing can happen regardless of the economic state in which you come to the thing. That's like, it's really a big deal, okay? It's a big deal. But ultimately, what's going on in chapter 1 is just a general offering in light of human sinfulness that cleanses something. Make sense? Chapter 2, I'm not going to spend time on as a grain offering. At the end of the day, the grain offering is, well, we're doing food offering to the Lord, and if you're going to have meat, you might as well have bread. And I know that sounds maybe a little overly simplistic and maybe a little bit sacrilegious, but that's what's going on. Then we have chapter 3, which is fellowship offering. And chapter 3 is really about reparation of human relationships. Chapter 3 is, hey, something got messed up interrelationally, we're going to fix it. You know, you go through whatever process to like reconcile, and then, well, we should have a party. And we should really, party is not even the right word. We should have a feast. We should go, we should go to a nice restaurant and consecrate the fact that we've reconciled. I'd love to spend a lot more time on those, but for our purposes and getting the big picture of Leviticus, we've got to get to chapter 4. Okay? Chapter 4 is a lot of translations, it's the sin offering. Some translations, purification offering. Purification offering is a better translation. Sin offering is fine when you're purifying from sin. The reason sin offering gets misleading is there are times when you give a sin offering for things like I mentioned earlier, giving birth. And so then when you start calling it a sin offering, it gets misleading because you start to think, oh, having a kid is sin, and you've got to have a sin offering about that, and then you get all these weird, convoluted, how is that a sin ideas. It's a purification offering. And so Leviticus 4 will have a real emphasis on purification from sin. So it sort of makes sense to call it a sin offering in chapter 4. But when you're in Leviticus 12 and you're talking about childbirth, it's purification from the you've been made unclean. It's how you become back to clean, common, normal. This has nothing to do with sin in that instance. Does that make sense? Purification, but sometimes it's purification from sin.
In Job, you were talking about how some words were just translated a specific way because of the way that they were written or sounded from the Hebrew to like English. Wasn't sin one of those in Job? No. Okay, never mind then.
No. So the Hebrew word here is chatat, which you can tell doesn't sound like sin.
Sure. Yeah.
There is the wilderness of sin, which has nothing to do with sin. It's just in Hebrew, sin.
In
And so you write it out, and it looks like sin, but it has nothing to do with sin.
I was
So
gonna ask if that was the same thing that was happening here with the translation.
It is not.
Instead of being purification.
it is not. It's a little more technical in this case. All right. Now, chapter 1 was structured herd, then flock, then birds. It's economically structured. Let's look at how chapter 4 is structured. I'll give you a hint. It's different. So, chapter 4, verse 3. If the anointed priest sins, bringing guilt on the people. Now, right off the bat, we're addressing purification from sin, okay? And then, do you see that's why it ended up getting translated sin offering. Tabernacle. You have a tent. In the tent, there's the holy place, which is the front 2/3 of the tent. There's a curtain, and then you have the most holy place, or the Holy of Holies, however you want to translate it, or whatever you want to call it. In the most holy place, there's a little box here. You can watch Indiana Jones if you want to know what it looks like. It sounds like I'm kidding, but it's actually like that's what it would have looked like. Here, that sort of symbolically, like this is where Yahweh is. Curtain, and there's an incense altar within the holy place, but then there's also like a big altar outside the tent. That's what this is. So this is the altar. And all of this is in a, the whiteboard itself. There's a fence that goes around all of this with an entrance over on this side. But for our purposes, for this, recognize that there's the main altar, there's a little altar in the holy place, and then there's the most holy place with this thing. All right, let's track what happens. So if the anointed priest sins, bringing guilt on the people, he must bring to Yahweh a young bull without defect as a purification offering for the sin he's committed. He presents the bull at the entrance to the tent of meeting before Yahweh. That'd be over here. There's a little entrance here to the whole complex. Okay? He lays his hand on the head and slaughters it there before the Lord. Then the anointed priest shall take some of the bull's blood, carry it into the tent of meeting, into the actual tent. Lays his hand, I already read that part, takes into the tent, dips his finger into the blood, sprinkles some of it 7 times before the Lord in front of the curtain, right here. All right, so an anointed priest, let's get the structure here. Remember chapter 1, herd, flock, birds. Now we've got anointed priest to start. Killing an animal, sprinkles blood in here. Sprinkles some blood in there. Then the priest puts some of the blood on the horns of the altar of incense. That's in here. All right. And then the rest pours out at the burnt offering altar. That's over here. Make sense so far? Anointed priest sins, brings guilt on the people. We're going to kill the thing. We're going to sprinkle some blood here, here, and here. Yeah.
What was the tent of meeting? Or what was the one that was outside of the, like near the entrance or whatever?
What was what?
Okay, so the tent of meeting is this.
You have okay, sorry, it can be confusing because there's an actual tent and then the entire complex can be called the tent of meeting.
Okay.
The same as the tabernacle.
Tabernacle. Yeah, it's the tabernacle. Tabernacle. Makes me think of schnackle. All right. Verse 13. If the whole Israelite community sins. All right. So, again, chapter 1, herd, flock, birds. Now our structure is anointed priest and then entire community. What are we going to do? If the entire community sins, then when they realize their guilt and they figure out what's going on, then they bring a young bull as this purification offering. They present it before the tent of meeting. The leaders of the community lay their hands on the bull's head. You kill the bull. Then the priest takes some of the bull's blood into the tent of meeting, sprinkles it before the Lord 7 times in front of the curtain, some on this altar, and the rest at the altar. In other words, anointed priest was kill the thing, sprinkle on horns of altar, pour out blood at altar. Now the whole community is sinned. You kill the thing, you sprinkle, horns of altar, rub, sprinkle, whatever, pour out blood. Same thing. Make sense? All right.
All right, I got a question.
I'm in.
All that blood being.
It stinks.
Yeah.
Oh, that was the question?
Yeah! Wouldn't it smell like, starting to smell? Like, do they.
It's bloody and disgusting.
Yeah, do they ever clean up the blood, or does it just like?
It's caked blood. Like that.
When they travel, you
Wouldn't
know.
that attract like a whole bunch of insects and stuff, and then get
I don't know that. Yeah, you just shouldn't. It's disgusting. That's part of the deal. Yes?
Do we need to note that when it was the anointed priest who did something wrong, or who is going up for or doing a purification ritual, that it was just one person that laid hand on the bowl, and it was the whole community, was all of the elders, and so there were multiple people laying hand on the bowl? Is that something to note?
Yeah, I mean, because when it's the anointed priest, it's one person, and when it's the whole community, it's not. That's all that is. So yes, note it, but don't
Don't dwell.
Yeah, don't.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep. All right, let's carry on. Next, verse 22. When an elder, or like in the structure of their society, this is like a civil leader, basically. So when an elder sins unintentionally, does what is forbidden in any of the commands of Yahweh, and then figures it out, he brings a male goat, lays his hand on the goat's head, they slaughter it, and let's see where they take the blood. The priest takes some of the blood of the sin offering with his finger and puts it on the horns of the altar of burnt offering and pours out the rest of the blood at the base of that altar and then burns stuff. So, all right. Elder, that is civil leader. So when it's the anointed priest, kill the thing, sprinkle, and pour, or just pour. Whole community, sprinkle here and there. But now it's a civil leader, everything just happens out here. Okay? And then there's a curious line at the end of that. So this is the end of verse 26. By doing this stuff, this is where the ritual efficaciousness issue comes in. In this way, in other words, by doing the thing, the priest will make atonement. Remember, when you see make atonement in Leviticus, think cleanse. So by doing this thing, the priest will cleanse something, doesn't say what, on behalf of the leader's sin. And he'll be forgiven. Wait a second. I thought we were already dealing with God's people. So what does it mean that he'll be forgiven?
Is that forgiven by God or forgiven by the people?
By God.
This is so.
It's by God.
Back to right standing.
There you go. Perfect. Way to go. Have any of you, since you've accepted Christ and become in relationship with the Lord, have any of you ever asked for forgiveness?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So was it like, all right, I'm going to heaven. Oh no, I got upset at my coworker. I guess I'm going to hell. Wait, I said forgive me, so now I'm going to heaven again. Oh wait, I just like. What? So you don't have this mentality that you're ping-ponging back and forth between heaven and hell at any moment. Hopefully, if you do, that's messed up. We need to talk about how that's not biblical. Okay, but like you laugh, but this again is one of the big things in the history of the church. Like in the history of the church, there were periods in the history of the church where we wait until the last possible moment, hopefully, but it's hard to predict, to get baptized, right? Because it's like I need to be baptized right before I die so that I'm clean and can go to heaven. It's messed up, but it's a thing. It's a real thing. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make is y'all understand I'm in relationship with God. I'm a Christ follower. I'm a believer. Oh, I sinned. I asked for forgiveness. That's not a salvation issue. That's a having a good relationship with someone issue, right? It's kind of like I'm married to Becky. Did you want to chime in, by the way, right now?
I don't have any jokes.
Oh, darn it. So I marry Becky. We're married. And then I do something stupid because, and it's like, and I need to go and ask forgiveness. Are we not married until I ask for forgiveness? No, that's ridiculous. We're still in a relationship. We're still married, but I need to restore the relationship because it's been damaged. And we use the word forgive for that. That's what's going on, okay? Don't get all weird that this is like how they got saved. Make sense? Okay, there's been a break. We're fixing it. All right, verse 27. If any random Joe Schmo, random person, if some random person sins, what do we do? Well, I'll let you read it, but I'll tell you, we're going to sprinkle blood out here. All right? So, the organizational structure of the book of this chapter. Remember, chapter 1 was economics. Herd, flock, birds. This is not economics. Okay? This is social position. Right? We had anointed priest, the whole community, which, by the way, includes anointed priests. Then we have civil leader, like non-priest people. Okay? The thing that I'm wanting you to see is that in these first two instances, priests are involved, and in the second two instances, priests are not involved. Yeah.
And that's why the priest can go up to the curtain,
Yes.
because he's closer to God.
No. Because he's a priest.
But why the curtain?
That's his duty, so he doesn't die.
Why can't the priest go just to the altars? Like, what's so great about the curtain? My understanding was that it's closer to the most holy place where God's presence is.
Super amazing question. And it's exactly where we're driving towards. But we got to get a little more info first. All right? But you are asking the question.
I'm
Right,
not
yes.
Jump the gun.
So, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
You two just paper, rock, scissors for who gets to go.
I'll go. I'll decide.
Yes, go.
So, in my translations, the sin is unintentional so far. Correct? So, oops, I made
Yep.
a mistake
Yep.
so far.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. That was an easy one. Yes.
I'm not trying to jump the gun here, but I mean, you talked about like who's done the sinning, but then like, it appears it's probably going to be something with what's being offered, because I see there's a difference. The first three, it's a male offering, a male goat offering, and the Joe Schmo
Yeah.
female
Yeah.
offering.
Yeah.
There is something there.
Yeah. Why do you think that's that? Let's just deal with that now, because it's not a massive issue for the book. It's just you make a good observation. Anyone either A, owned sheep, had a sheep farm, or just watched Jeremy Clarkson try and farm? Anyone?
Yeah,
What? Yeah?
they're dumb.
How many sheep are dumb? And if you're a shepherd, how many male versus female sheep do you own?
Oh, like a lot. Two males and 50 females.
There you go, like 2 males and gazillions of females.
Ah, come on.
So now you tell me what the issue is.
It's an economic issue.
It's an economic issue. Yes,
The priest was, it didn't say anything about unintentional sins, but every
it did.
Donde, which is Spanish for where.
Right at the beginning.
Thank you, I found it.
You're welcome. All right, this is all unintentional. All right, we're good. We're okay. All right, let's get a little more evidence so that we can circle back around to Krista's very important question. Let's go to Leviticus chapter 16. Leviticus 16 is the Day of Atonement, or the Day of Cleansing, because it's Leviticus.
Not really clean, actually.
All right, now we got to try and track what's going on here, okay? And so we're just going to go piece by piece and try and follow what the deal is. Yahweh spoke to Moses after the death of the 2 sons of Aaron when they brought strange fire. You can read about that earlier if you want. Yahweh said to Moses, "Tell your brother Aaron that he can't just come whenever he feels like it into the most holy place, back here, behind the curtain, in front of the atonement cover on the ark." That's this little box here, Indiana Jones. "Or else he will die. For I will appear in the cloud over the atonement cover." So here's how Aaron. What's Aaron's role? Anyone know?
He's a priest, isn't he?
He is. He's more specific. High priest. He must first bring a young bull for a sin offering. That's a chapter 1 offering. Okay? So the first thing he's going to do is a bull for a chapter 1 offering and a bull for a chapter 4 offering and a ram for a chapter 1 offering. You with me so far? He puts on the fancy underwear and the sacred garments, and he must bathe himself. This is the cleanliness issue. Before, when I had that whole thing laid out, he's got to be ritually clean. From the Israelite communities to take 2 male goats for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering. All right, let's just catalog this real quick, okay? So just for himself, right? This is just for himself. So for Aaron, we need a bull for sin, that's chapter 4 offering, and a ram for burnt. That's, again, chapter 4, chapter 1. Right? Okay? And then for the community, okay, so just for Aaron stuff, but then for everyone, on behalf of everyone, we're going to have 2 goats for sin, and a ram for burnt. Okay. Make sense? These are just for Aaron. These are for everyone, of which Aaron is a part. But verse 6, Aaron offers the bull for his own sin offering to cleanse on behalf of himself and his household. We still haven't said what we're cleansing, by the way. You get this? So he's going to take the bull, that's this one. And again, we're dealing with this chapter 4 offering, the purification offering, the sin offering. So so he does that. He's to take the bull for his own sin offering to cleanse something on his behalf. Then he's to take the 2 goats, also sin offering, right? Also purification offering, chapter 4. And present them before Yahweh at the entrance to the tent of meeting. And he's to cast lots for the 2 goats. 1 lot for Yahweh and the other for Azazel or scapegoat or whatever. That's these things, okay? We have 2 goats. And these 2 goats, we're going to have 1 for the Lord. And we're going to have 1. That's a translation issue that I'm not going to get into. Some of your translations will say scapegoat. Some of your translations will say Azazel. We'll just see what happens to them and let that be sufficient. All right? So, Aaron brings the goat whose lot falls to Yahweh and sacrifices it as a sin offering. Now remember, purification offering was chapter 4 when it was a priest or the whole community, which includes priests. When a priest was involved, sprinkle blood here, here, here. When a priest was not involved, sprinkle blood here. Okay? Now, Aaron is involved, the high priest. So, he brings the goat who falls to Yahweh, does the purification offering, but the goat chosen by Lot as the scapegoat, or the Azazel goat, whatever, is to be presented alive to cleanse by sending it into the wilderness as a scapegoat. The text will come back to that, so that shouldn't make any sense yet. Don't worry about it. All right, verse 11. Aaron brings the bull for his own purification offering to cleanse something for himself and his household, and he slaughters the bull. This is going to sound like chapter 4, okay? Because he's doing a purification offering. He's doing a chapter 4 offering. So he slaughters the thing, takes a censer full of burning coals from the altar before Yahweh and 2 handfuls of finely ground fragrant incense and takes them, bum, 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 dramatic music, back here. Back here. We haven't been back here yet, right? But he's going to go back there. Verse 14, he takes some of the bull's blood with his finger and sprinkles it on the front of this thing. Then he sprinkles some of it with his finger 7 times. This thing, it's all back here. He then, on the front of the atonement cover. Yeah, it's like on the front and before, as whatever. It's all in here. Then he slaughters the goat for the sin offering for the people. All right, so we just did purification offering of the bull, and we went back here. Now we're doing this one. So this is for the whole community, including Aaron. Verse 15. He takes his blood, again, behind the curtain. Does the same thing he just did with the bull's blood. Sprinkles on the atonement cover and in front of it. You with me so far? Okay, let's review. We're dealing with this purification offering. When a priest is involved, we kill the animal and we sprinkle blood here, here, and here. When a priest is not involved, this is chapter 4, we sprinkle blood here. When the high priest is involved, that's these, we go back here.
Is it kind of like a soccer team that you can't go so far? The high priest can go all the places, so all those places need to have atonement or cleansing for a high priest, and the other priest cannot go behind the curtain to the Holy of Holies. They can only go to the front, so they're going to atone.
That's exactly right. You only need to cleanse where you've ever been. That's the point. So the average non-priest never goes in the tent. I don't know if you're aware of that. Like the average Israelite never goes in the tent.
Do they even go in the outs, like the?
Yeah, you gotta sacrifice your thing.
Yeah.
But it's not normal. It's not like this isn't going to church, you know. This isn't, hey, let's all just go set up chairs in the holy place and worship the Lord. Like, so non-priests never go in the tent, so you're gonna cleanse out here. Priests go in the tent, so you're gonna cleanse out here and in here. The high priest is the only one who ever goes in here. So when the high priest is involved, we're going to cleanse in here. Make sense? Okay. Verse 16 is the critical verse. Because up till now, I keep saying, oh, we're going to cleanse something on behalf of the person, right? Verse 16, we're going to get a direct statement of what we're actually cleansing. Okay? In this way, he will cleanse the most holy place because of the uncleanness and rebellion of the Israelites, whatever their sins have been. He then does the same for the tent of meeting, which is among them in the midst of their uncleanness. No one is to be in the tent of meeting from the time Aaron goes in to cleanse in the most holy place until he comes out, having cleansed for himself, his household, and the whole community. Then he comes out to the altar and cleanses it. So the thing that I'm trying to get at here is all of this lingo is something has been made dirty by your sin. From a Christian perspective, we are just so wired to think that the only thing that's ever made dirty is us. And so it's virtually impossible for us as Christians to think of anything other than people needing cleansed. Okay? You got to let that go. Because in Leviticus, it's not about cleansing the people at all. It's about cleansing something else that the people got dirty on behalf of the people who got it dirty. And that something else is God's house. Does that make sense? Yeah. This is why when a priest is not involved, you cleanse out here, because that's all the further they ever get. But when a priest is involved, you cleanse this part and this part, because priests go in here and they go out here. And so you got to cleanse it. And when the high priest is involved, you got to cleanse out here and in here and all the way back here, because he goes there. And the thing that the ritual is teaching you through this whole analogical action is you, by your very presence, mess up the presence of God. You, by virtue of even being around, make it difficult, if not impossible, for God to be around. Your presence is like a negative impact on God's presence. So if we're going to have God present, dwelling in a house, in our midst, in a tent, in our midst, you got to cleanse the tent or God can't be there. That's the whole analogy that's operating in Leviticus. Which is why I always say Leviticus is this amazing book about how can a holy God live in the midst of an unholy people. And a lot of it has to do with all of this cleansing stuff. You have to cleanse God's house. Yeah.
So how often would Aaron make a sacrifice for himself?
Once a year.
He would sin, or just once a year? And then can I ask one more question?
No. Anyone else? No, I'm totally kidding. Go ahead.
So in verse 12, I think this is, oh no, verse 13, it says that he puts incense over the
Yeah.
seat so it burns, and so that it says it covers the mercy seat so that he does not die. Is that like literally like if he does not do that, God would kill him? So is
Maybe.
that covering his like aroma? Because that's what it makes me think of, like incense, smells different. So I was just curious, like why?
I think it's more an issue of the smoke. It's covering. It's a. Again, this is all ritual,
Right.
and so this is analogical. Okay,
Yeah.
this is an issue of you're not gonna. Those who see God die.
Sure. Okay.
So let's cover up God because He's here.
Gotcha. Okay. That makes more sense.
Yeah, but you got to understand, like this is ritual stuff, right? And if it's like any analogy, if you press it too far, the analogy is going to break down. Yeah.
So for all the sacrifices and the animals that have to be sacrificed, these are all every time somebody sins?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know. I mean, in theory, but
I mean, it seems to me
how does that work?
It seems to me like they're
You'd run out of sheep real fast.
Yeah, they're gonna run out of animals.
Yeah.
So this isn't like just a once a year thing. This is supposed to be like
The burnt offering has like regular cycles that you see in other places in Scripture, but there's also an element of a free will, just basically free will offering with the burnt offering kind of element to it. But yeah, the purification offering, you're going to have, if you sin unintentionally, do this thing. I sinned unintentionally. I'm not. Shoot, the tent is closed. I'm not going to get to it tomorrow. Oh, crud, I sinned again tonight. Is tomorrow going to cover that? Like, you start, when you start pressing this thing down to those kinds of details, two things are going to pop out. One, Leviticus is not interested in answering that level of detail, right? How do I know this? Because if you read Leviticus trying to figure out what actually happened, right? Read chapter 1 saying to yourself, I'm a priest and I got to pull this thing off. All of a sudden you're going to be like, these instructions are utterly inadequate. Because you're going to start asking questions. You're going to be like, does it matter which hand I hold the knife in? I got to slaughter the animal. Can I just slit its throat? Do I need to pull out a bow and arrow? There's just the Matthew Spector. Yeah, bow and arrow. Yeah. The Wenham does a good job of talking about this. As a OT guy. It's a mistake to think of Leviticus as a handbook for priests, because if you start trying to read it as though you're a priest and this is your handbook, you're going to figure out real quickly, this doesn't give me enough information. So Leviticus is more of here's some highlights. It's written to people who already have a basically intuitive understanding of sacrifice. Blood sacrifice is everywhere in the ancient Near East. Everywhere. It's weird to us, totally normal to them. So Leviticus will highlight differences. It doesn't give you a handbook level of stuff. So that's part of what you're dealing with. Yeah.
Will you say the principle again? I wrote, ritual is saying you by your very presence, and I lost it.
By
I don't know what I said. What did you say?
Mess up and make it impossible for God to be around you.
Yeah, that your presence has a negative impact on God's presence.
Yeah, your presence has a negative impact on God's presence.
Even when you're sinning, or just in general?
Yes.
I respect that.
Yes to both. Okay. All right. We all right so far?
Was
same thing during Jesus, when Jesus was there.
We'll get there. All right, so we need to deal with this scapegoat thing real quick, okay? These are verses, well, I'm skipping a little bit of stuff, but that's all right. We'll be okay. The point is being made, but, well, no, let me just read verse 18. Then he comes out to the altar that's before Yahweh to cleanse it. Notice in verse 18, it explicitly says, you're cleansing the altar. That's the big one out there. Okay, so when I say you're cleansing God's house, you're cleansing the stuff. Like, it's stated directly. I'm not just being weird. Okay? Takes some of the bull's blood and some of the goats, these are purification offerings, puts them on the horns of the altar and sprinkles some of the blood 7 times to cleanse it. Do you see that? It's directly stated. You got to let go of any of this stuff cleanses people. So now what's going on? This stuff cleanses the tabernacle. All right? Scapegoat. When Aaron has finished cleansing the most holy place, the tent of meeting, and the altar, it just states it just point blank. It's amazing. He brings forward the live goat. This is the scapegoat. Lays both hands on the head of the live goat and confesses over it all the wickedness and rebellion of the Israelites, all of their sins, and puts those sins on the goat's head. It's very critical that you notice this is the only time where you put the sin on the animal. Okay? Don't, just because in earlier chapters it'll say, put your hand on the animal or whatever, that's identification issues. This is the only time where it's like, hey, we're going to name the sins, confess them, and actually place them on the animal. Okay? This is important because what do you do with this animal? The scapegoat. I mean, read the next verse or the rest of this verse.
Which verse?
Yeah, you get rid of it. 21. 21, 22. Okay, 21 and 22.
We're still in 16.
Yeah. The only animal that you ever put the sins on, you send it out into the wilderness. Okay? What?
In the translation I have, it doesn't, I'm in NLT, it doesn't say anything about the sin being on the animal.
Verse 21. Read verse 21. Read it out loud. What do you have?
He will lay both of his hands on the goat's head and confess over it all the wickedness, rebellion, and sins of the people.
Keep going.
In this way, he will transfer the people's sins to the head of the goat.
There you go.
Okay.
There you go. This is the only instance where the sins are transferred to the animal. Okay? And what do you do with this one? Oh, well, I mean, it's carrying sin, so you've got to sacrifice it, right? You need to kill it. It needs to die because the wages of sin is death. What do you actually do? You get it as far away from God's house as you can. You send it out into the wilderness. Okay? The reason I'm making such a big deal out of this is there's this huge misunderstanding. Because what people do is they take what they know about Christians and Jesus and they just slap it onto Leviticus. So what do you have with Christians and Jesus? Jesus died for our sins. The blood sacrifice, our sins were put on Jesus and Jesus died. So it must be that what's dying in Leviticus is carrying our sins. Nope. What's carrying the sins of the people? The scapegoat. What do you do with that thing? You get it away from God's house. What I'm trying to say is that from a Leviticus perspective, the idea that you would put sin on an animal, slaughter that animal, and sprinkle its blood on God's house, that's just about the dumbest thing you could ever come up with. Hey guys, let's put all of our sin onto an animal and sprinkle all of that sin all over God's house. That'll get him to stay. No. Why So why blood? It's a bunch of different possible answers, but one thing I'll mention is that elsewhere in Leviticus it explicitly states life is in the blood. Okay? There's this thing, again, this is analogical, this is ritual stuff. There's this idea that life is contained in the blood. And so when you're sprinkling blood, like to us, it's like, oh, we're sprinkling blood. That's disgusting and not clean. But to them, what they're doing is sprinkling life, because life is in the blood. And the thing that you have to understand is this entire analogy, all of this stuff, especially as it relates to clean and unclean, is an analogy for life and death. And in general, in Leviticus, the things that bring life are clean, and the things that don't lead to unclean. Okay, it's not always easy or obvious to see that, but that seems to be the general rubric. But my point is that life is in the blood, and so we're sprinkling blood to cleanse God's house. And then when we actually put sin on an animal, we just get that thing away from God's house. Because you don't want that stuff anywhere near. Okay? Now, again, I keep trying to press the fact that this is ritual. So where is the efficacy? In other words, what makes this thing work? Is it the doing of the action? It's kind of a trick question because the answer is yes and no. Doing the action makes it work insofar as you're being obedient. And God's like, hey, here's how I want you to do it, so do it that way. And when you don't do it that way, things don't go well. That's the Nadab and Abihu story, the Aaron's sons, right? They amend the way they've been told to do it, and it doesn't go well for them. So there is this element of, like, you do the thing that God says to do, because God said that's the thing that works. But along with that, this is the no part. Along with that, there's always an element that at the end of the day, ultimately it's God who makes it work. And this is what people forget. This is where you get into all of your, for example, I was using the baptism example earlier. Like, well, they were baptized. I don't know that I want to use that example. Well, I'll just tell you a real example. I'm not trying to make big denominational statements. I just remember it really struck me as curious. There was a couple that had adopted infants, and they were in a tradition where you baptize infants, and so they had the infants baptized, and then it was kind of tragic, but the birth mom decided to reclaim the kids. And I remember just listening to the conversation about this, and one of the people said, well, praise the Lord, the babies were baptized before they got sent back to be with their mom. And what the guy was saying is, by virtue of the fact that we baptize them, no matter what else happens for the rest of their life, at least they're saved. Because they were baptized. Now, there's a whole bunch of theological underpinnings to that I'm not trying to get into. I'm not trying to turn this into a baptism debate. The thing that I'm trying to say is it brings to light this whole issue of where is the actual efficacy of the ritual? Is it in just simply doing the ritual? Is it in the faith component? Is it in God doing the thing, God's response. Like, where is it? Okay? And I think a mistake that a lot of Christians make when they think about what's going on in Leviticus, and it's the mistake that ancient Israel made, was the idea that if they just did the Leviticus stuff, they'd be fine. It's kind of like the Mardi Gras idea. You know, it doesn't really matter what we do that night because we're going to give our penance the next day and everything will be fine. And there was that kind of attitude in ancient Israel. And God addresses it in Isaiah. So I want to read a little bit of Isaiah chapter 1. Isaiah chapter 1, let's cut to the chase and start at verse 7. Your country is desolate, your cities burned with fire, your fields are being stripped by foreigners right before you, laid waste as when overthrown by strangers. Daughter Zion is left like a shelter in a vineyard, like a hut in a field of melons, like a city under siege, unless Yahweh Almighty had left us some survivors. We would have become like Sodom, and we would have been like Gomorrah. So listen up, hear the word of the Lord, you rulers of Sodom. Listen to the instruction of our God, you people of Gomorrah. That's addressing God's people and calling them people of Sodom and Gomorrah. It's not a compliment. But verse 11 is the key line. The multitude of your sacrifices, what are they to me? Says Yahweh. I have more than enough of burnt offerings, of rams, and the fat of fattened animals. I have no pleasure in the blood of bulls and lambs and goats. Think about that. I have no pleasure in the blood of bulls and lambs and goats. But think about Leviticus chapter 1. There's a pleasing aroma. He has pleasure in it. So why is it that in Leviticus 1, this is this pleasing thing? And in Isaiah 1, I got no pleasure in this. Be more specific. Because yes, but I just find that as Christians, we cop out on intentions too much. We cop out on intentions and heart and like, come on, what is it? What does he point out?
They're not living rightly.
There you go.
Leaning on the sacrifice to make it okay.
That's it, guys. It's you can't disregard Torah and then do your sacrifice and think that God's going to be like, well, I'm glad you did your sacrifice. Okay? And you cannot take a ritual, even if it's a ritual that God gives you, you cannot take it and assume that he has to behave in a particular way just because you did the ritual.
When you say that, I think of, I'm not trying to bash, but, the confession, like in the Catholic Church.
Yeah, I mean, insofar as the confession is like, I'm confessing, great. Insofar as the confession is, I don't give a crap, but I get to say my formula and I'm fine. It doesn't work.
Just do your Hail Mary, your 2 Hail Marys. And
Yeah. It's the same with us. Yeah.
You say people cop out on intention too much. Do you mean like they ride the grace train too much? Or?
I just think like it is a normal, common default answer to go to intent or the heart. Like I'll say, what's the issue here? Oh, it's the heart. You know, what went wrong here? They don't have the right heart. They don't have the right intent. Like that is like this normal, common default answer that we give about. I just hear it a lot, and the thing that I'm trying to get at is God. That's not what God points to in the passage. What God points to is you're denying justice. You're ignoring Torah. Or think about Hosea. Have any of you heard the super famous line, I desire mercy and not sacrifice? It's Hosea 6. It's mercy's maybe not the best translation. It's I desire covenantal love. In other words, I desire for you to do relationship in such a way that you take my Torah and my justice seriously. And you do it. And you have an eye for the vulnerable. The widows in your community are cared for and not trampled upon. You aren't seeking out the vulnerable so that you can take advantage of them for your own gain. These are the things he talks about. It's not, well, you guys have a great heart, but, I mean, you took advantage of the vulnerable. But you know what? Golly, your intent was good. That's just not how he talks, you know? And so, I mean, look at back to Isaiah 1. Stop bringing, verse 13, stop bringing meaningless offerings. Your incense is detestable to me. New moons, Sabbaths, convocations. I can't bear your evil assembly. These are things he commanded, guys. These are all things he commanded. And he's looking at him and going, this stuff's stupid. I can't stand it. They're a burden to me, verse 14. I'm weary of them. When you spread out your hands in prayer, I hide my eyes from you. Even if you offer many prayers, I'm not going to listen. Why? Here it is. Because your hands are full of blood. Wash and make yourselves clean. Take your evil deeds out of my sight. Stop doing wrong. Learn to do right. Here it is. Seek justice. Encourage the oppressed. Defend the orphan. Plead the case of the widow. Guys, all of this stuff, when the Old Testament talks about justice, it's not talking about you get what you deserve and this weird way that Christians talk about justice. When the Old Testament talks about justice, it's talking about doing Torah, which means you work towards lifting the vulnerable up out of their vulnerability, which gets talked about normally gets talked about in things like the care for widows and orphans. It's why James says true religion is this, right? Taking care of widows and orphans. Why does he say that? Is he just coming up with random stuff that he's just pulling out of the air? It's the heart of Torah. And so when God kind of goes off like he does in Isaiah chapter 1, it is not, well, guys, you're doing your sacrifices, but, I'm not sure your heart's in the right place. It's not how he talks about it. Yes, their heart is not in the right place. I'm not saying their heart is in the right place, okay? I'm just saying that the way we talk about it is not the way he talks about it. And the way he talks about it is encourage the oppressed, defend the orphans, plead the case. That's legal stuff. Plead the case of the widow. It's like, it's Torah. It's care for the vulnerable kinds of things. All right, and this is everywhere. It's everywhere. How are we doing? Okay, there's two major points that I was hoping to make tonight that I'm not going to have time. So maybe we'll pick this up just a little bit, spin out some of the implications at the beginning of next week. All right? The two big things are, how do we see that this stuff is on God? In other words, Paul has this amazing statement in Philippians. It's God who works in us to will and to act according to his good purposes. And you see in Paul a very different picture than an angry and present God who's just waiting to thump you. And part of what I've been saying all along is Leviticus is huge in that. Like, I when I hear Paul say, it is God who works in us to will and to act according to his good purposes, all I can hear is Leviticus. So I feel the need to unpack that a little more. Like, how do I get that out of Leviticus? So that's one thing I had hoped to get to. The other thing is we need to take a minute. I think it would be really helpful to take a minute to look at how the author of Hebrews talks about this stuff in light of Christ, which is the thing you brought up earlier, and that's a Hebrews thing. Okay, I'll give you a little teaser. Like, if you want to give a read this week to Hebrews 9 and 10, feel free. But I'll just tell you up front, the thing that it gets at is the blood of bulls and goats, it never had anything to do with people. That takes a greater sacrifice, namely Jesus. But what the blood of bulls and goats did have to do with, and what the blood of bulls and goats was sufficient to cleanse, was the tabernacle. What's the tabernacle? It's God's house. What if we change God's house? What if instead of thinking of the tent or the temple as God's house, what if people became God's house? What kind of sacrifice would be necessary to cleanse that house? And that's what Hebrews 9 and 10 deals with. All right? So we'll look at that next week. And then, if you have some time, skim the Gospels chapter in the textbook. All right? It's a long one, and it's kind of dry. I'm just going to warn you.